We live. All right, so we are here with the third installation of the Duelyst Central podcast. You may notice once again some new faces, and one moderately old one. I am the last remaining member of the first podcast. As let's see, Alpha Centauri got sucked into the Large Hadron Collider. I think the Good Guy Hopper turned into a football, and Uno Pro dropped off the face of the earth. But we welcome you all here, and I will. You know me, I'm our hacker 93. I'm a grandmaster and whatever. But let the rest of the people introduce themselves, starting with you, Son of Makuta.
All right, yeah, I'm Son of Makita. I'm a streamer, occasional other video maker, very occasional tournament player. Um, yeah, that's it.
I'm Icy Fire. I'm a duelist writer, I guess, and tournament player.
Hey, Frost Arrow, longtime card gamer, recently getting back into the Duelist scene and starting out streaming. Also, card editor, as you might have seen if you stopped by my stream.
You're also the only 6-0 from the first week of the Meltdown League, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, no, to start things off, we're actually going to go to the power rankings, which came out just earlier today, I actually think. Well, if you're me. If you're Icy Fire, they came out yesterday or something.
Yeah, 11 my time.
But yeah, no. So to start off our discussion of the power rankings, assuming that y'all have gone over it, do you think that you saw anything that surprised you in terms of placements? Starting with you, Frost.
Well, I haven't seen the Ebon Ox list before. This is my first time seeing it anywhere, ladder or otherwise. So I was pretty surprised to see Ebon Ox showing up anywhere, but it's pretty spicy. I'm excited to try it out myself, and I think it's cool. It definitely shows that the meta is not fully solved or fully all the decks have been found yet.
Mm-hmm. Icy?
I'm interested that.
Oh, sorry. If you're gonna keep going, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, this is kind of going into a little bit later. I'll get into this more, but I was surprised to see no Vath lists in the top 20.
Ooh.
But we can come back to that later.
All right, Icy.
I was surprised that Fault got second. Like, I feel that it's worse than some of the other things like Wanderer Raver, Aggro Reaver, um, Tempo Zuran. I think those are better than Fault. Just yeah, because Fault's good on ladder, but and has some polarizing matchups. But I think it's pretty easy to counter, and if you play right in the matchup, you can pressure it enough that it can't do much.
By counter, do you just mean like play really fast decks? Because I felt like when I'm like sticking to a deck on ladder, it's pretty hard to like sub in like specific cards to beat that deck.
Well, yeah, but a lot of the meta is relying on playing fast decks now. A lot of people are playing Wanderer Fault or a fast deck. So yeah, that is what I meant by counter.
So I gotta say, I actually have a theory about kind of the fall of the fault, if you will, which is that I think that the rise of Wander indirectly really sort of hindered fault, because one of the things that I found in playing is something that's really good against Wanderer are things that don't just ping for one, but ping for two. And so that I think that 2 damage effects that have kind of become a little bit more relevant with Wanderino with like Tempo Ziran, which is a great example of that, since they got Tempest, they got Sunstrike, which isn't actually 2 damage, but is 3. Stuff that's big enough to clear Wanderer BBSs, Sunriser, really also hurts Fault, as you're able to kind of AoE clear all their dervishes every turn anyways. So that's my kind of theory on that one.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that that's one of the reasons that Wanderer Rag is the most popular Wanderer list and generally considered the strongest one, is that those eggs do have 2 toughness, and I mean, no creature post Wanderer has 1 toughness, right? Because they're all buffed. So like a
Mhm.
lot of the natural counters to Ragnora and a lot of the natural counters to Magmar are kind of negated. So like Wanderer kind of like covers up a lot of that class's weakness.
Plus, I think the thing with Fault that made me go off it in the end, because I played a lot of Fault until recently, but the early game is really inconsistent. Like sometimes you have, Metallurgist into Dream Shaper and it's great, and then you play a Scorn or a Spelljammer, and other times you do none of those things. You just sort of, and like if you're playing against a powerful aggro deck, you can put some golems on the board and then die. So there's it's quite hard to bridge the gap between like turn 1 and Fault. I see the Improbable Blob's actually running Wasteland Wraith, which is really clever, because that might serve that purpose in certain matchups. But I think generally the deck's relatively low amount of healing and inconsistent like early game snowball potential does hurt it.
Makes sense. Kuda, do you have any other decks that, since that was Icy's deck that they found was surprising, or their fact they found surprising? Do you have anything yourself?
Um, so the thing that jumped out to me was so I've not had a I've been asleep just for full disclosure for the past 7 hours. So I've just been scrolling through, and the thing that jumped out at me was there's this huge crop of Lionel decks that are all next to each other, sort of just below the top 5. None of them can quite crack it, but there's clearly something in this faction that consistently performs middlingly well. And it's quite cool. I mean, they're Lionel, right? They're the sort of middling faction. It's almost their identity.
Right. I don't know. I can't remember the last Lionar card that got hit by a nerf. Is kind of what I'm thinking about. Like so many of the other classes have been
slow.
Slow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
slow
that
is
was
my
the last
answer.
one.
It's slow. A while ago. Yeah.
It
So it's
might
like
be slow. It might be slow.
all of the like cards that have historically been strong in Lionar have been strong for a really long time and are still strong.
I think
they're kind of able to rely on that core.
I mean,
There's
I
a
think
Tempo Zeran deck with Orbo in it. Sorry, carry on.
Or yeah, no. I mean, that's a new development. We'll get to that later. But what I kind of think of is that one of the things that kind of pushed Lionar away a little bit was that we went through a long period of like Vitruvian dominance. You know, the entire like, oh man, 3 Blood of Air, 3 Sands World Raiders, just done. And that really wreaked a lot of havoc on a lot of what Lionar was trying to do, like, developing bigger minions. But, that took a hit, both because the meta adjusted to it, also because Sands World Reader itself got nerfed. And it's just kind of like lost a fair amount of popularity. Like overall, I don't know. I feel like I'm seeing way less Wanderer right now, or not Wanderer. I feel like I'm seeing plenty of Wanderer. I feel like I'm seeing way less Vitruvian, just in general, than I was like a month or two ago.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think the nerf to Accumulonimbus knocked a lot of it out, and then I think as the meta shifted to be more and more aggressive, Fault became worse as well, and that was it, right? Those are the 2 vet decks, Fault and like Sarge. Cipheron, very sadly, isn't really a thing. So I just leave Xerix going face.
Some people are trying to change that.
Yes,
so,
they are.
I was going to say, personally, my little surprising thing was just that there wasn't anybody who actually rated. I don't know if it's really surprising to me, but it's just something I noticed was that nobody really pumped up the trial Mave decks. I feel like I see a ton of those. I'm not surprised nobody really championed them as the best deck in the format, but I do feel as though you see a lot of people who think that they're one of the best decks in the format.
And there was no Mave at all in week 1 of Meltdown, trial or tempo, which I was kind of like 50-50 on if there'd be a trial deck, but I was pretty sure that someone would be playing the tempo deck, the Dying Wish, carrying collector deck.
That deck is not that good though. Like I mean, all respect to Alpha Century who built it. I think it's kind of I played it for a bit and it is sweet, but but it relies very heavily on specifically one thing, which is you essentially swarm your opponent with Duelysts,
Right,
which
getting
like
those dying
only
forces
works
off.
that well against aggro, and doesn't have any healing, from what I remember. And you're playing sellsword, so like you got these big dudes, but if your opponent can kill them and keep pressuring you, it's not going to work very well. Which doesn't seem like it would
I
fit
think
this meta amazingly.
Yeah, there's definitely like strong counters to it. I just think that the core of the deck, which is the 3 carrion collectors, 3 lurking fear, um, just does something that's so degenerate, which is just like give you a cost of 0 cost creatures, and if you have enough draw in your deck, you can just continually refuel your hand. And like a deck that has that level of degeneracy, just like absolutely has a place in the meta.
Having played a lot of lurking fear decks,
Hmm.
in theory, yes. In practice, you spend so many of your slots on basically cool value tempo plays for the mid to late game that it's really hard to like not die and or win. So you beat up on like traditional control decks that have to grind through all your value stuff, and like you put Vorpal Reaver and Reaper of the Nine Moons into play on the same turn, and they're like, oh my god, what do I do?
Yeah.
But again, against like those decks aren't really in Duelyst anymore. Now, like, what's the point of playing hard control, because Wanderer is a thing and all these different, other combo win cons are a thing, and then there's all these aggro decks and tempo decks and stuff, which it doesn't do as well against. And I've tried lots of different builds, and they've all had the same property, basically.
Well,
Sure.
I agree with the whole level of degeneracy thing, and like what that deck can do against something like Wanderer if it ramps out and then plays a Chakram is insane. But I think the reason, like, it showed up in power rankings in top 20, but the reason I don't think it
Hmm.
was played in the first week is because you see a lot of aggro decks, and against an aggro deck, pinging yourself for 2 every other turn is it's just terrible. And
Yeah,
without running any
definitely.
healing, I think that's going to cause you to be really. It's going to cause a really polarizing matchup in the aggro deck's favor.
Yeah, I was actually just gonna say that, and I see you brought this up a little bit, but I actually think that more important than the cost reduction cards is Chakram, because the cost
Definitely.
reduction cards are nice. They allow you to flood the board. But you were talking earlier about how slamming down a Vorpal Reaver or a Reaper doesn't really do all that much in terms of impact. It does if there's a Chakram involved, as the follow-up. Because, those minions are hard to deal with.
Hmm.
And if you don't deal with them, you can play them back because they have like celerity or flying. And then you can just fly in to get this like huge frenzy off of a Chakram. And I think that is, to me, when I was playing the deck, the like really big deal. And then Chakram also allows you to like kind of make these big end game spectral revenant plays. So you kind of use it to survive the early game. You like play a defensive game, and then you just come in, wipe their board. Like a Reaper clears a Wanderer, with Frenzy and all the other stuff around it, because they've got a lot of minions because they're Wanderers. So
Yeah,
I wasn't trying to say that playing Reaver and Reaper in the Nine Moons in the same turn wasn't good. It's just that the other stuff the deck was doing wasn't up to par. Just to clarify, but I completely agree with you. The Chakram is important. Sorry, Frost, I would carry on.
you're good. I actually I would go further than Fear Chakram is good. I would say Fear Chakram is probably the best card that class has to offer, save maybe Darkfire Sacrifice in one specific deck. So that I think the best Abyssian deck is like whatever deck can best utilize or abuse Fear Chakram, and right now that's that deck as well.
Well, when it comes to what deck can best abuse Chakram, I think that would be the Wraith Crown Lilith deck that's going around.
But playing any sort of Hyperstorm is just as easy, if not more, able to be countered than the Lurking Fear deck. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I
I
just
think
in comparison, I think it's better than the Lurking Fear.
so. I think that Hyperswarm deck is good, and for a specific reason, which is So I was playing Wraithcrown Lilith on stream the other day, and I was very, very impressed with it. This was the list that Re69 posted a bunch of anti-Wanderer decks in Reddit. I'm not sure all of those do actually counter Wanderer, but I played the Hyperswarm deck. I didn't run into any Wanderers, but it was awesome. It's good because all of your payoffs are artifacts. Between Wraithcrown and Furrow Chakram, you can just make it so that if you play a Wraithling, it's massive and scary. So if your opponent AoEs, the artifacts survive, and you get to rebuild with big-ass minions instead of having to, oh, they played an AoE, my Shadow Dancer is dead, my Bloodtide Priestess is dead. You can recover much more fluidly because you're not committing as much into the AoE or into basically the counters to your deck. And, Rust Crawler is a thing because people play it in Wanderer, but there's only one of it, and that doesn't counter the Wraithlings themselves. It just removes the buff. So you still get to have a board. They have to have Crawler plus AoE to properly wipe you out.
I can see that.
I kind of... Oh, what are you going to say?
I was just going to say, I imagine with that list, I haven't played that Reese list yet, but I also imagine that like a lot of your opponent's blood tier alchemists and blistering scorns are drawn out just to clear your original Wraithlings, that by the time you have the artifacts out, some of those other things that can answer them as opposed to Rustcrawler have like also been used up.
Yeah.
So what I was going to say is, the way I view this, you're talking about liking this more than the kind of like big dudes off of the Dying Wish deck. I like this less because I think that people are starting to counter Swarm, similar to how I was saying Fault has lost a bit of power. I think this suffers from a lot of the same things, because like some of the biggest things you have to deal with are BBSs off of Wanderer. Even though it's less, people still do play Fault, and people definitely fear Fault. Strategos and Swarm Brome, we haven't really talked about, but have definitely been seeing an uptick, at least on the competitive side of play. And so I really feel like Swarm strategies, things that want to go big, and also are kind of getting punished. And also that's especially true because Wanderer decks are running a bunch of AoE. Like, Wanderer decks run usually almost all the AoE they can get their hands on. So...
Yeah, I agree, and kind of the point I guess I was trying to make earlier, which I think you elaborated on a little bit, is that I think Swarm decks and Duelyst are the easiest decks to tech against, the easiest decks to try and counter, so that like if that Wraithcrown deck ever got really good, like it could be easily quelled. Kind of like how I think, yeah, Swarm Brome is really good, Strategist Brome is really good, but if people know that it's the big bad in the meta, then they're going to be easily able to counter it. Whereas the Lurking Fear deck is kind of like on its own game plan that's a little harder to mess with.
I agree that if it were the top deck in the meta, it would be very easily teched against. But in response to what Hackers said about a lot of Wanderer jamming a bunch of AoE, like TM25 was saying in the Duelist Central Discord, Wraithcrown and Furiosa allow you to dodge a lot of the conventional AoE that Wanderer would run that would normally, or that people are counter-teching against Strategos and Swarm Brome. Like bringing your Wraithlings up to 4, it dies to Rebuke, but it dodges Plasma and a lot of the other Blistering Scorn and Crater, that sort of thing. Stuff that you would normally use to tech against a Swarm deck becomes obsolete once you've got Wraithcrown in play.
Yeah, actually, as an addendum to that, if you're looking to beat all of the Swarm decks that are currently a thing, right? If you want to beat Wraithcrown and Strategos and whatever else, the only actually good AoE is Plasma Storm, because Rebuke kills basically 0 of Brome's minions. Obviously, it can help you make trades, but if you're behind on board, you just need to clear it. Rebuke doesn't generally do that. They're all 1/4s. And against Lilith, Blistering Scorn or Crater is really good, like on turn 1 or 2, but as you mentioned, they have 6 ways of increasing the toughness of Wraithlings. They can't even... You can dodge Plasma Storm with 4 power, but I feel like that's rarer enough that most of the time Plasma Storm will still get you there. But it does actually drop off quite quickly. Like Plasma Storm and Rebuke are like Rebuke is best against Lilith and Plasma Storm is best against Brome. But the mass pings aren't actually that effective in either matchup. They help, but they're not, like you mostly against Brome you save the pings for Jackson. Like if you draw a Crater or Scorn as Wanderer and you're playing against Brome, you don't want to play it to like try and tempo their board, save it for Jax. Because otherwise you'll lose to Jax. So I like and it doesn't really. There's no loss to do that. It doesn't really do much else. Like I pinged the 1/4. Now it's a 1/3. Yeah.
So
I think it's actually the counters aren't quite as consistent as it would seem.
I took
Especially
your
for-
sixes down to 1/1s. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Rome, I would say Wanderer Ragnora's counters aren't specifically as great, but against Lilith, so when you think about it in theory, it looks like, oh man, a one ping damage, that doesn't do anything. But you don't, unless they have a Ferosa, you don't actually have to ping the Wraithlings. Also, Rebuke kills everything out of Lilith. Rebuke also kills Jax, which is like the most important thing to kill in Brome. But that's a little off topic from what I'm talking about. But the thing is, you just have to ping Lilith twice if they got a race crown, and all the Wraithlings die. So sometimes it's just kill the main thing, and as long as you got one ping off on the Wraithlings, they're all dead. And you play to win to the board. You're good at clearing bad minions, which Wraithlings are. And you play stuff like Maw, you play stuff like Fizzling Mystic, and so you can just commit these bigger bodies to the board and force them to answer them every turn. And if they don't answer them, they just play a bunch of bad minions, and then you eat their bad minions with your good minions, and you stay in control of the board. So I don't know. I think that matchup is better than people give it credit for if the Wanderer player plays it right. But I've gotten into many long arguments about playing Wanderer right and the difference between a very experienced Wanderer player and a kind of inexperienced Wanderer player. But kind of wanted to move on a little bit in our itinerary since we got stuck on that first point for quite a bit, but it was a good discussion. I wanted to keep it going. So I'm kind of actually going to jump a little bit ahead and ask you guys, is there any decks that you didn't think or you're surprised to not see on the list, on the power rankings?
That puts me up first.
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit earlier, that I was shocked to not see any Vath deck in the top 20. And I think the last month's power ranking had Vath at like 22 or 24, right outside that range of top 20. Which, by the way, I do like seeing the slimmed down power rankings of just like the concentrated 20 best decks in the game. Like I still remember that first power rankings, it was like 50 decks. It was like, whoa, that's a lot. Yeah, Vath was ranked 3rd in week 1 of Meltdown. Someone running Drogon Vath had 100% match wins. So, and I see that deck a lot on ladder in many different iterations, and it seems really good. And like it is a terror, so I think it deserves a start.
Yeah, I agree. I was playing mid-range Vath on the ladder the other day as well, but with the statistics in Meltdown, it was just one person running it, and it was Death Advocate, so it was a good pilot. But I think the reason it didn't get on there is just because the deck doesn't really stand out. We had 37 or 38 decks that we were voting on, so the cutoff was pretty tight. So a lot of the ones that made it in, probably the difference between 20, which was the Ebenox deck, and all the other things that got rated average 21-ish, probably all could have been interchangeable. It's just Titan Ebenox. A lot of people, it stands out, so a lot of people would have voted that a little bit higher.
Yeah, I did go back to some older power rankings, and mid-range Vath was ranked 5th. The 5th best deck in the game in April, and the 12th best deck in May. So it was considered top tier, but it's been like slowly slipping, slowly falling out of favor. And I would expect a resurgence pretty soon.
I think it's just
Whether
been. Oh, sorry to cut you off, but I think it's just been falling out of interest and falling out of. Like it's always been the same. Nothing's really changed.
Yeah.
So people just aren't playing it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I've been running into Drogon Voth a decent amount. There's a couple of dedicated Voth players who are still doing their thing on ladder, and now that Fault has dropped off, you don't get embarrassed by Kingdom Car anymore. So, in retrospect, I'm a little bit surprised to see it not there. But on the flip side, I don't actually find the deck as intimidating as I used to. Right? Definitely in the past, mid-range Wrath has been this like terror deck that oh wow, there was a period of time where it was really good, and I was trying to play Kalios and it was horrible. But I think now when someone's plays out a cryptographer on turn, I'm like, okay, sure. I don't know what's changed, but I think maybe the deck, as you mentioned, the deck's kind of been the same for a while, but the meta has grown up around it. Like now we have 4/2 Rippers, and we have all these aggro decks that are powerful. We have like weird wall decks and stuff that don't really fall into the traditional thing of like play creatures that die to Lava Slasher and then get punched in the face. That you kind of the things that Drogon Voth preys on, right? So I think that there might be something in its disappearance, even if, as a whole, we are possibly sleeping on it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I know I saw Riverrath the other day complaining while posting their deck list in the general chat of Meltdown League to submit it, complaining about Lava Slasher and how they were being kind of shoehorned into being convinced to run it. And 2, 3, 4 months ago, even with the -2 health, I feel like in a deck like Wanderer, Lava Slasher would appear to be an auto-include. And I think in many it still is. I know in my mind it still is, but we're reaching a point where it's maybe the meta isn't even very conducive to running just strictly better, well, not anymore strictly better, but almost strictly better Bright Moss Golem. It's still a pretty huge tempo play. But kind of to tag on to what I had to think about that, I do think that I've been seeing more Vath recently, and I am a little surprised to not see it on the power rankings, but maybe it hasn't permeated into the culture of upper players who are kind of set into their ways or whatever. And I think that it does struggle a little bit against how powerful the Wanderer mid-range decks are, and I know that Vath specifically struggles against Ragnora, who's very popular, because they have a hard time dealing with Rebirth minions. Magmar in general does, kind of ironically, since they also are Rebirth minions. But so I think that's kind of pushing it back, but at the same time, watching the Meltdown League the first week, actually saw some of Death's Advocates matches, and I can say, against all the aggro decks that are popping up right now, Saurian's Finality is a house. That card just ends games on its own. And so it might be a resurgence of Saurian Finality rather than a resurgence of Vath that we're really looking at right here.
So yeah, I just want to cut in. I pulled up the voting sheet. Mid-range Vath placed 26th. Its highest rating was 19, which was given to it by Hacker. Its lowest was 22, which was given to it by Alpha. And it averaged at 20.58, which Mantra 20, Control Scythe 20.43, Bond 20.86, Wraith Crown 19.15, and Titanox 18.72. So you've got those 6 decks sitting there from 20 to 26, all roughly the same average. So it was very highly contended for it making in.
Speaking of Saurian Finality, just talking about Death's Advocate, I noticed earlier that DA is specifically playing Adjudicator in their in their mid-range Wrath deck, which obviously is not a mid-range Wrath card. I think that deck is basically intended to cast Finality as quickly and often as possible.
Yeah.
And that would be like maybe that's the secret sauce. Like DA is quite a good deck builder, to say the least. So maybe that's the way to make it work, is to focus on something that isn't just I play my Mercantor Warbeast and kill all your guys. But instead is like Finality is very powerful against aggro, very powerful against combo, very powerful against Wanderer, or at least reasonably so. So the card, as Hacker mentioned, it lines up well against the meta in a way that the rest of the deck sort of doesn't. And so possibly that's the way to go, is to do that, to focus on that. Like, are we going to see people playing Mana Forger as well? Genuine question. Like, it's probably worth experimenting with.
Is Finality that good?
I don't think it's actually that great against Wanderer, but I think it's very good against most things that aren't Wanderer. But moving along, Icy, you're up next if you had a deck that you're surprised to not see make the power rankings list.
If I pull up the voting real quick. The Mantra, actually. And Hate Furnace. Hate Furnace placed 37th. It was the lowest rated deck. I feel like Hate Furnace has been showing up a lot on the ladder. It's definitely viable. I was surprised that it got rated the lowest when we had Wizard, 8 Gates, and Grow in there.
You might notice that there are some pet decks for people who are also voting on the power rankings in that in those choices you just gave. So that might be a little bit of it.
Yeah, well, Bondage, I'm not going to assume you brought that up. Yep, you rated that 15th.
I think it's actually higher than that, too. But, people haven't believed me on that deck for 2 years now, and I don't expect them to start now. Goody, you had something you wanted to say, though?
I think I might have forgotten what it was in the... Oh, no, Hate Furnace. I feel like I should point out that although I've played against Hate Furnace a reasonable amount with a decent variety of decks, I've never seen anyone cast it. The deck, there's a lot of different cool builds of Hate Furnace that people have experimented with over time. I don't think it's there yet. If there may be, especially in future, if more cards are printed, there may be a build of that deck that can actually complete the trial and play Hate Furnace and win the game with it. As it is, they play a bunch of Vindicators and Harrispexes and then die with like 5 or 6 quest completion every single time I play against it. And I think I think that deck is, sorry for any Hate Furnace fans watching, but I think right now that deck is probably appropriately rated. Like, it's really, really hard to complete the quest without dying. And a canny opponent will know that, that they're under some sort of pressure, because eventually you will do it. And they'll pressure you and kill your minions, clear the board, and just basically play aggressively and make tempo plays. And I think it's just quite hard to beat that with a deck like Hate Furnace, where you just have buffs and minions. You don't have like that much removal, you don't have that many control tools, that much healing, because a lot of your slots are dedicated to making sure you can actually tick up the trial progress. There's the same problem we had earlier with Lurking Fear Mave, where you kind of want all this healing and removal and stuff, and you don't have room. So I think right now it suffers from that.
I am definitely a Hate Furnace fan, and I've actually had a good amount of success climbing with it on ladder. I do definitely agree with you, Makuta, that it is very limited in that it has to have almost every card slot dedicated to, is this a minion or is this something that pumps a minion? So there isn't really a lot of room to run removal, apart from like maybe like Kinetic Equilibrium, which like counts as like buff plus removal, but I kind of think that card is bad. Like, I don't even play that in my list. And that maybe in the future a better list will appear. But I also think that there is a list out there that, when it's optimized, could be super competitive. I do feel like this happens a lot, and I know it's been a while since the nerf, but like when a card gets nerfed or when a deck gets nerfed, it's just like people like are it's like bad voodoo to like even like talk about it or like try and test with it. And I feel like Hate Furnace kind of still has that vibe of like, man, that card got nerfed. I just don't want to touch it. Even though I still think through the nerf it is still more competitive than people are giving it credit for.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Frost. I've got a list from actually from back in Standard when that was briefly a thing. I had a Standard Hate Furnace list that I was making and kind of tuning, and I got it to a point where I was happy with it. And it's a list that is dedicated to getting Hate Furnace out, which I feel like you'd like, Makuta. Seeing as you're worried about it actually getting there. And the answer that I found was not kind of like the Harrispecs kind of thing, but was actually more off of what you were talking about, Frost, where it's like this kind of synergy with keeping your hand full, buff spells, and just kind of like minions that let you cast your buff spells. Like the best card in that deck might be Allison Fugitive, and that's sweet. Like, have you ever played a Rush Frenzy Alsuin Fugitive that you then buff and get back the buff afterwards? That feels really good. Also, the card that goes with Alsuin Fugitive is Bellow. Bellow is my kinetic equilibrium. Because you bellow something, and especially if you have a Fugitive, like, I love playing a Fugitive, having them play Wanderer, and then just bellow locking their Wanderer to keep it stunned for, like, multiple turns, and it's ticking up my Hate Furnace. And then once you actually get Hate Furnace out, you just frenzy their entire board, and it doesn't matter. Obviously, I'm not saying it's, like, the perfect deck, I'm not saying it's the best deck, but I think there are currently the tools to make a deck that really works. So, that's my hate speech.
On the topic of pet decks that we kind of brought up earlier, and both Hacker and Frost said that they think there is an optimal Hate Furnace deck out there, but nobody's found it. And I know I don't have my camera on, but I can't keep a straight face whilst I'm saying this. I think I built it a while ago, and that's Flyhorn. It made it into May power rankings, and so you run like an aggro Starhorn with a bunch of buffs, and instead of running things like Harrispecs, you have Young Flamewing and the Wings of Paradise. And so your goal with the deck is to play a flying minion on turn 1 or 2, and then fly it up in Bellows and Greater Fortitude. So you've stunned up their board, and you've hit face for 7 or 9, and that's normally enough to finish out the game. And then you have Hate Furnace in there to thin the deck and as like a backup plan if the game goes on too long. I think that might be the better way to play Hate Furnace.
You had me at Young Flamewing.
So I also had a thought while we were talking about this, which is we were discussing that part of the problem is it's hard to not die, right? Like you're playing all these minions that are just big, and then you're buffing them and spending lots of cards making large minions, and then they get removed in your set. So what if we took a leaf out of the old pre-nerf Kara playbook and just played a bunch of neutral interactive minions? Like, you've already got Lava Slash and War Beast, or you can. Not everyone plays those, but what about more? You can cast more Greater Fortitude on turn 2. That seems fine, right? Like, what about Sunset Paragon or Bone Reaper or all these, basically all the Wanderer cards? You could just put them in your Hate Furnace deck, and then you have a way to defend yourself and interact with the board. I have to try this. It gives you, and then you play like Thraix and other things that give you easy access to buffs.
So what you're suggesting is, sorry to cut you off. So what you're suggesting is you run your removal package in your minions so that you have room for all the buffs.
Yes.
I think that's a pretty good idea.
It's interesting. You guys are going the opposite direction that I usually think about when I play Hate Furnace, which, like, when I go into a Hate Furnace match, I consider myself the aggressor. Like, I am running at them, and I'm playing a Cryptographer, and I'm going to double Greater Fortitude it, and I'm going to say, can you beat this 6/6? And, like, if they can, I'll just draw another card. Like, I'll play my Vindicator, I'll BBS, and then I'll start pumping that Vindicator. And, like, I feel like the power that deck has is playing Minos or Vindicator, or like even like Crater into amplification, like just putting these massive minions on board, like what Magmar does best, and saying, can you answer this? And even if they are answering it, you're ticking your quest up. So like at the end of their chain of removal spells, boom, you have a 5/4 Frenzy Rush, like to follow up your curve.
That never seems to work when people do it against me. like, I don't know, maybe, I guess if you can force your opponents onto the defensive and they get stuck in that mindset, like, oh, I have to not die and eventually you'll buy time. But, like, I usually, when I play against Hate Furnace, my plan is to kill their stuff and them. And then I get to beat the clock. I don't know, maybe there's a... I'd be interested in seeing your list, actually. Maybe there's some differences there.
Sure. Yeah, there are definitely some differences. Just listening to the card choices that you guys have been talking about.
I'm used to the like Haruspex, Vindicator, Visionar build where you draw your opponent cards and then it makes your stuff bigger, so you can profit off the BBS with Cryptographer and things.
Yeah. I think Cryptographer is like probably the most important card in that list. To get more value out of your Vindicators and Minoses.
Yeah, even in my list, it's like pretty important. It's part of what I was talking about with like hand flow. I don't know. Mine's a weird control deck, but moving on. Just to keep things moving along, Makuta, are there any lists that you're surprised to not see on the power rankings?
I don't think there's anything that we've covered that we haven't already covered. Just looking at the Meltdown League, the only thing that isn't on the rankings.
The power ranking.
No, as in like looking for other lists that we haven't missed. The only thing that did well that we haven't covered so far is Arcanist Shidai, and I'm not surprised to not see that. I think that deck is actually alright though. Like, I play it occasionally, and you think it would be banned because you're like, I play my big minion, and then my other big minion, and my opponent removes them. But actually, in practice, it sort of works out maybe better than one would expect. Shidai's Bloodborne spell is so good for Arcanist because it allows you to play Chakri Avatar and not feel embarrassed about it, is the main thing. Like, because previously Avatar required so much investment and then they dispel it and then you're like, oh, I lose the game. But now you can play it and just BS and play the petal, and it's a 3/4 already, and that's pretty solid. And you've also maybe drawn an extra card or teleported something. And the fact that you have so much access to so much free Arcanist triggering gives, not only obviously that's good, but it actually opens up cards that you wouldn't normally put in. Like I think I was running Bloodbound Mentor at one point as well. You can hybridize it with other cards, like minions that generate spells are just the same as spells, but they also affect the board. So you can put in Cryptographer in your Arcanist deck, and you can do, like, I think there's actually there's probably, thinking about it now, there's probably some more deck building to do with that archetype that might actually push it into the meta a bit more. Even though it seems like it would be bad in a world of Wanderer and aggro decks. Like, if people are playing low removal aggro decks and you play Owlbeast Sage, what can they do about it? They have to kill you before it just eats them. So as long as you've got some healing, you're probably alright.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that actually, I think Arcanists right now is a little bit of an underplayed archetype. I think that it's a deck that, people talk about how, oh man, it's so hard to outvalue Wanderer. Arcanists can pretty easily outvalue Wanderer. Like, they got some answers, but, like, it's hard to, if they can't answer an Owlbeast Sage played defensively, like, that scales really, really fast. Arcanists are good at building up walls between you and them, like, of basically any genre, not just Arcanist Shidai. So I think that Arcanist is a little bit of a sleeper. I actually think they struggle against the aggro decks, as they're usually able to kind of burst them down before they really get going. But for a deck like Wanderer that kind of wants to establish its own board, do its own thing, like try and remove some of your little guys that you're playing to tempo them out, like suddenly you play an Owlbeast, like BBS, buff 2 guys, and you're like pretty well off. And if they can't answer it, then the game can just end there. So that's kind of my opinion on the whole Arcanist situation.
I think Arcanists, especially Arcanist Vanar, is underplayed because of the stigma around it that was built up a while ago when it was the dominant force for way too long, and it was one of the only decks played, and I think a lot of people still just like they see Arcanist and they kind of get a salty taste in their mouth and they think, thank God that was nerfed. I'm not going to play that anymore. It was boring.
That deck is so much fun.
Oh, it really
Also
was.
worse than aggro vet in that meta. Just saying.
I learned so much from those mirrors. Oh,
Yeah.
man.
And now we have Wonderland players.
I agree. I see fire. I also think that that's kind of happening with Vault Xerix. I mean, I know we've already kind of talked that to the ground, but there is definitely a stigma around Vault Xerix. People, like, it's almost like a gentleman's agreement of just like, let's not ladder with that. Let's not.
Right. But the thing is, it doesn't inspire the same like love of the deck that Wanderer inspires in Wanderer players. Like Wanderer players, people who like Wanderer will like defend it so hard.
I will defend that deck right now.
Yeah, no, I have defended that deck in multiple large arguments, but nobody's defending Vault Xerix.
Yeah.
So
Vault
yeah,
Xerix,
kinda-
just comparatively to something like Wander or something like an aggro deck, Vault Xerix is a very just boring deck to play. It does the same thing every time. It's you want a Celebrant, ramp into 6, Fault Ray, Blood of Air, Sandswell, anything they develop, and then eventually kill them with 2/2s.
But what you fail to see is that the deck is amazingly aesthetically appealing. Like just line after line after line. It's so pretty.
The march
watching
in
them,
of
like,
the
march
Duelyst.
forward.
Like the
Yeah,
battlefield.
you get it, Frost. That's the beauty of Vault Xerix. That's why it's not boring, is because it's aesthetically appealing to me.
I actually quite enjoy playing Fault. And I have to admit, it was quite nice seeing people get up in arms about a card that I spoiled, being Kanumka. It's like I finally got something good. But I actually think it's quite fun to play. Like I said, the main reason I dropped it personally was it's wonky early game because it doesn't necessarily do the same thing. Sometimes you play out 2 golems on turn 1 and then 2 more golems on turn 2 and draw some cards, and other times you play like some 1/4s and then your opponent kills you. Those bits are the problem, and that also means the Wanderer matchup is not as good as it kind of should be because Fault itself is good against Wanderer, but it's kind of slow, and they can just put up this huge board, and if you don't have, they can force you to spend your turns Blood of Air and stuff, and then at some point you lose to Rippers without having really established a beachhead in the early game, so it can be a little rough.
Well, yeah, whether or not a deck is boring is its opinion, but with Fault, in my opinion, I find it repetitive, and I find it having more linear lines of play than something like Wanderer, where you can really sit down and really think, what's the best thing here? Because there's, especially in Wanderer, there's so many more options than a deck where you run 3 of cards.
Max out that clock every single turn with Wanderer. Those are my favorite decks. The decks that you have to spend the whole turn thinking about every turn.
Yeah.
I play every deck like that. It's great. I lose to the ropes so much, but it's quite fun.
Nah, you see, my strat at least on ladder is play fast, play loose, and then use the mistakes you learn that you make while playing fast and loose on ladder to play well in tournaments. Because learn by embarrassment. It'll stick
What
with
if
you.
you play slowly, mess up anyway, and then the embarrassment's even greater because you spent 90 seconds thinking about a play and got it wrong?
But think about how many
That's my
mistakes you aren't able to make because you take so much time to make one.
I fixed that by just being bad at this game.
I actually think there's some truth to what you're saying there, Hacker. Like a lot of the game is muscle memory, and like I can't count. Like I can't even think about how many times I've like decided on a line in my turn. Like I've looked at my hand, decided a line, and then been like, okay, now why should I not do that line? And come up with like 3 others and like convinced myself against the good line. It's like if I had just trusted my gut and just executed the clicks like I had originally thought them out, I would have just had the better play.
Mm-hmm. No, that's getting into a whole nother topic though. So I'm gonna actually take this time to finish this up say what I'm surprised to see isn't on the list. I'm not actually surprised, but I'm annoyed it isn't. Which, if people have known me, it's, Bond Lionar. I've been playing that deck forever. I've been telling people that deck is good forever. I've been having people tell me that deck is bad forever. So, such is life. But we do have more that we want to go on to. And so, transitioning, I want to start talking about my baby, which is the Meltdown League, which all three of you are playing in. And Icy, I know you're being a manager, and so actually helping out. But I wanted to have you guys, talk about your experiences with it these first 2 weeks. So
Terrible. It's just been the worst.
Shall I start?
Yeah, sure. You can start.
So I am loving this. I was enthusing to Hacker about this last night in Discord. I think so. The league structure is brilliant for fixing timings. People can schedule their own matches. You don't have to have an entire evening or an entire weekend day free to play a long tournament. You don't have to worry about make sure I'm fed and got hydrated and mentally prepared. You get the tournament stress where you're going to play 5 rounds of intense Duelyst and it's going to be difficult. None of that. It's just I can approach it at my own pace. And I love how much discussion it's generated. I'm so much enjoying the community side of it, where there's lots of stuff going in the chat. I'm chatting with my opponents after we play each other and discussing decks. And I'm just spending loads more time talking about Duelyst and thinking about it than I was before, even if I don't have time to actually play. I'm checking Discord at work and stuff, on the loo, talking about the meta. That I really, really enjoy that side of it. So it's been, I would never have thought of the idea of a long-running tournament league, and I think it's working insanely well. The limited number of matches per week, so there's no pressure to I've got to find all my opponents. The lack of a specific time where you have to play and allocate. I think the games themselves have been good as well. This meta seems fun. I'm enjoying my deck. Cough. I'm playing Wanderer. Cough. It's great fun. Wins games. I got pretty lucky against you, Frost Arrows. We'll cover that in a bit.
The elephant in the room. We haven't brought it up yet. You're my only loss.
Yeah, well done on that. That's remarkable. But yeah, I've been absolutely loving it. This is great.
Icy?
Yeah,
you got anything to say?
I've been having great fun. As an Australian player, I really like being able to organise my own match times. Waking up at 2 a.m. for Monolith Climb, it's just not an enjoyable experience. You start misplaying by... whenever I've made it to finals in a tournament where I've had to wake up at 2 a.m., I've just started misplaying insanely because of how tired I am. So being able to organise my own match times is just amazing, and a little bit of tournament nerves in some of the matches that I looked at the opponent and went, oh crap, how am I going to beat this person? But other than that, it's been a pretty casual and fun experience, which I'm sure will change by the last few weeks when everyone's aiming to hit playoffs.
Well, I hope that the competitive spirit kind of burns a bit brightly throughout, but I did want it to sort of allow for a casual experience as well. Good stuff to talk about, but not just be super cutthroat. So sounds like that's working, which is good.
Yeah, I agree with all points made. For me, I've been having a blast. This is actually my first tournament, so I don't really have other comparison points. But one thing that drew me to this was just how accessible it seemed, and I think just interacting with other players and seeing the decks that are being brought, other people seem to be vibing with that, that it's just super accessible. You can kind of bring what you want, and matches have been a little one-sided for me these first couple of weeks. And I was talking with Icy about this earlier. In part, that's due to the deck I was playing, which is an aggro deck, so it's gonna be a little swingy. And then also in part because earlier in the tournament, it's the randoms are just the matchups are just random, But going forward, it's going to be based off of your standing, which I think is really good. One thing I'm really excited is to like kind of see going forward how like the metagame within the tournament evolves, because like week one everyone just went into it kind of with their ladder experience and maybe looking at past tournaments. But like I know week two I was looking at my week one opponent's list and like oh, what can I do to counter? What do I think they're gonna swap decks? Do I think they're gonna stick with what they played? And like that's only gonna get more like mind gamey going forward, I think, which I'm really looking forward to. I think that's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I can actually say, kind of to put in my 2 cents on this. I was really happy to see as many archetypes as I saw. I before the tournament started, I kind of polled people and asked if they, thought that the kind of people running the tournament should have the ability to ban cards if they became problematic. That was voted pretty heavily in favor. So we do still have that power, but looking at the metagames for both the first and the second week, we're seeing like almost 40 archetypes with nothing really making up more than like 15% of the total decks, which is, really nice from the standpoint of somebody who's like, do I have to ban something? And, at least from the first week, I wouldn't say you can get that much data from 1 week, but it didn't look like anything was like being way too dominant. Like everybody's playing the same thing. That's the only thing that's one. So.
Yeah, we have a limited data points, but I think I definitely, I guess I wouldn't be against banning cards, but I would like to see that come a lot later. Because the coolest thing about a metagame and the coolest thing about card games is that the players in the metagame self-regulate, Like the best decks right now, like most winningest decks are Brome decks at the top of the win rates. But as we've talked about, those decks are easily teched against. So like Brome, I do not think Brome is going to be at the top in maybe week 2, because for week 2 we haven't had all this information, but definitely week 3 Brome is going to sink down, and there's going to be other decks that have been able to tech against it that are going to rise up.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't plan on using the ability to ban stuff, I can say. And obviously the what you're talking about is something that is optimal where the metagame evolves. The reason I wanted to have that power was because I know that people have been kind of afraid of the lack of communication from CPG about whether or not we're getting banned or getting adjustments to cards and stuff. And so if something really does become problematic and we don't know if anything's going to come in to balance shift or balance change it, I wanted to have the ability to say that, hey, we can still run a fun tournament, because if this just becomes incredibly oppressive and no one can win if they don't play this deck, and nothing is you can either play a deck just to counter it or you can choose to lose. I wanted to say that we have the ability to, as organizers, to say, hey, we've decided that this card isn't healthy. You don't have to worry about the higher ups and whether or not they're going to say something.
Yeah.
But as of right now, I can say that I have no intention of banning anything. And I guaranteed I wouldn't ban anything the first week, but really I don't think I would even consider banning something until around week 4 or 5. But I'm not really seeing anything that I think needs banning right now.
Yeah, I definitely think the fear of a binary format is there, and if you've been around card gaming scenes long enough, you've seen it, and it's not fun, where there's the big bad deck and everyone is just trying to either play it or beat it. But I don't think we're close to that really at all. Even, and I think most people make the argument now that Wanderer is a little overtuned. If they're gonna complain about something, it's gonna be Wanderer. But if Wanderer even is the best deck in the format, I don't think that's necessarily bad. Because I think you want a metagame where a mid-range deck is the best deck. Because it kind of splits the field. You know, you got half the people going under it with aggro, you got half the people going over it with control, as long as those archetypes are viable. And then you have your small pocket of players trying to do degenerate things with combo decks to try and beat it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So that was the first, just kind of like, oh, what did you think of the what do you think of the Meltdown League experience? So now I wanted to ask you guys is, you've all done fairly well in these first 2 weeks, and I was wanting to know kind of what was the process that you went through to decide what deck you were going to play, and like how do you feel about your choice? Is there anything that like you'd change? Like, you know, would you change the deck you played if you could resubmit right now and replay your matches this week?
I can start again. So I'm playing Wanderer Reg. My list is very similar to Reveroth's in the main deck. The sideboard is completely different. I like it. I really like it. I am currently, so I've played 2 of my 3 matches this week, and I won them both. The deck has a lot of play to it, and I think many of its supposed counters are not quite as countery as they should be, in a sense. Like, it still comes down to, like, do you know how to play with the deck and against Wanderer, and does the Wanderer player know what they're doing? And so far, I've definitely had one game that I lost because I mispredicted what my opponent was on, and I replaced an EMP and then regretted it because they were on they were playing Ice Age, and that was a bad idea. But you know, beyond that, like, that sort of knowledge imbalance is quite important, I think. But yeah, I think Wanderer is counterable. I think the counters to it are maybe not what, at least in the hands of, like, if you're just a random player and you don't have practice with a particular deck and you want to pick up something that counters Wanderer, I think the cards that the decks that people tout as being counters to it, like, actually require a lot of knowledge to successfully play as counters. It doesn't have decks that just eat it. It doesn't, because it doesn't really have inherent weaknesses, and it has a lot of different outs to different situations that it can still draw into or hold on to. And plus, I really enjoy playing it. I picked it up after I had a ridiculous ladder. I think on ladder with it, I'm like 43 or something. Like, you know, it's absurd. So, yeah, I was like, well, this deck is clearly way better than anything else I could play, and I'd gone off fault a little bit, so I jumped in with it, and I'm having fun. I'll switch if I need to. I think once people start coalescing around things that do actually beat Ragnarok, because it is powerful, it is considered the deck to beat, and a lot of people want to stake their claim as being like the person who beat it, the person who built the thing that beat it. I know, because I've been there before. Played Keep of Arthur, all those like Disruption Fae players, because I was like, yeah, this actually works. So in the same vein, I think at some point people are going to start finding reliable actual counters to the deck. I think I have one in mind already that we'll go over later. And so when that starts happening, I'll probably jump ship. But until then, I'm really happy with it.
I see. I know you're out of the 3 of you, you're the only one who's like really shifted your game plan.
Well, so week 1 I went with Aggro Raidva. It's just my go-to tournament deck ever since. When did Alpha origin? 4 months ago when he did the video, the first video, and then I picked it up, and then I got coaching from him, which is on his channel, and so ever since then I've been maining Aggro Reaver every tournament I play. And then week 2, I played Control Vath to counterpick my opponents. It had the strongest matchup against all 3, so yeah, I went 2-1 the first week, 2-0 the second, 2-0 the first week with a bye, 2-1 the second week, so I'm pretty happy with my choices. Might consider running Wanderer if I had to go back and choose it again, but other than that, I don't know, I'm probably just going to counterpick my opponents every week. I think that's the ideal strategy.
It's definitely difficult. You have to do a lot of research to do that. You have to feel kind of fluent with a lot of different decks if that's going to be your game plan. But that's the kind of thing that can really pay off if you're actually able to pull that off. People can't really predict you then.
Well, with the opponents that I fear enough to counterpick, a lot of them I know. A lot of them I know what their playstyles are, what they'll play. I can spectate them on the Duelyst client and see their ladder games to get an idea of what they're playing. And generally, I tend to get bored if I play one deck, so I switch around enough to be able to play different decks and game plans. So for me personally, I think that's the best strategy. For other people like Riverath and Jason, playing the same Wanderer deck over and over again definitely works as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I played Strategos Brome, although I kind of consider it like a Strategos aggro hybrid. I definitely knew I wanted to open the tournament with an aggro deck, because I was going to try and prey on just people, I don't know, maybe tentatively starting the tournament off, before the meta was established, the tournament meta. I just wanted to come out of the gates as fast as possible. And I'm definitely glad I stuck with the deck for the first 2 weeks. The inclusion of Strategos, I think I could have done without. Like, I could have probably just been pure aggro, although I did win with Strategos Jack's True Sight a few games. So it's really it's hard to say in that regard, but I'm happy with my choice of Brome. Kind of what you said, Makuta, I agree with, where you said like eventually you plan to jump ship, and I've already talked about how I think Brome's gonna sink as people play different decks or tech their decks. So my jump ship might come a little faster than I was planning, but that's fine. I think one of the coolest things about this tournament is you can consistently reinvent how you're approaching it. So I'm excited to like swap decks and try new things out too.
Mm-hmm. I didn't actually play, since I'm the lead organizer, manager, admin, all these titles, but I can say that were I to play, there is a large chance that I would play Ragnar Wanderer, but I think I might have actually jumped ship week 2 into Titan because I'm really happy with my Titan build right now. I think that Titan Lionar is a very strong deck at the moment, and that we finally have despite us talking about how kind of like, wow, there's a bunch of archetypes, I think that we're finally starting to see which ones are sort of coming out on top and being able to build Titan lists that will actually be able to counter what we're seeing right now. That's what I would have done. I can't say if I would have changed it or how I feel about it, because I didn't really. So, but yeah, no. So going down the list, the next thing we're going to talk about is the format of like single deck with a 10-card sideboard, and how you guys kind of feel about that. I can tell you that from just sort of a background story bit, that this is the format that was chosen by people. I remember ages ago talking to 3 Moves Ahead people. They actually said that this is just easily the most popular format for people. And I was back in New or whatever, and I was like, whatever. I don't know what the most popular format is for this game, but I know that the official tournaments are all done in Conquest. So that's what I'm going to learn, because I wanted to get to the Duelyst World Championship. But now we have the freedom to kind of look back at what they've been saying, and when I put it up to a vote, actually I put that up to a vote twice on format. Both times, one deck with a sideboard was the most voted for format by a pretty decent margin. So, what do you guys think of it? Frost, we'll start with you.
Like I said, first tournament, so hard for me to compare. But I think the biggest thing for me is accessibility. If you own one deck that you're really proud of, you're really happy with, can run that deck every week, and that's fine. And you can tinker your sideboard or grow as you see fit. You don't need three decks like other formats, or you don't need one deck per faction. On the other side, you are rewarded for having extra decks that you can swap to as needed, as Icy Fire was saying. So I like the flexibility of it a lot.
Icy?
So I actually have pretty strong opinions on this that aren't really backed up that much. I think one deck with sideboard should be how it is for the 10 weeks or 12. Is it 10 or 12?
12 weeks now.
For the for the 12 weeks of Swiss, I think it should be one deck with sideboard. Like in best of 3, I think it's really good. You have your game 1 with the main board, and then game 2 and 3 is completely different with the tech cards added in. Whoever sideboards better can often win the set regardless of how turn 1 turned out. But when it comes to playoffs and like the single elimination tournaments, I think I like Conquest where you have more decks than you do games so that you can ban decks, because I think that's a really interesting element of strategy that I like putting into competitive end of tournament. I don't think it's worth doing for 3 sets a week, which is why I agree with the one deck 10 card sideboard. But for playoffs, I think it should have been Conquest with deck banning, regardless of how the votes turned out.
I could say, just as sort of a response to that, 2 things. One being that I would kind of fear what Frost was talking about, where you'd lose a lot of the accessibility if people were like, oh, I can play in the part that doesn't really have anything for me to win other than like giveaways, but like I get to the playoffs and all of a sudden I need like 4 different decks or like 4 different factions decks, and I don't have that. I don't want to like go for that, and so I think it's important to keep the consistency and say, if you start this tournament with one deck, you can end it with one deck. The other thing is that Conquest as a format was really, I don't know, as far as I know, I've been playing a number of card games over the course of my lifetime, which, I'm not that old, but Conquest really seems to have been invented for the digital CCG, specifically Hearthstone, and comes with its own little bit of a plethora of problems. People argue that it's kind of forced variety, meaning that people don't have to balance as well because you're going to see more decks, and it's like, oh look, they're like the top players are playing all these decks, and they're like, yes, because we have to. Because otherwise we can't win unless we play factions that are less good than this one. But the other problem that Duelyst has actually run into, which I guess by now we could just call like the Feroka syndrome, is that Conquest can be broken if there is a neutral archetype and it is strong enough that people are not able to bring a suite of decks that all counter it. That's the entire thing with like the Mechazor originally, and then Wanderer with Trials of Mithron, which I joined Feroka. Like 3 of the top 4 players in the Trials of Mithron tournament were on quadruple Wanderer, I think. I think we had 4 decks and you banned one. No, it was 3 decks. So triple Wanderer. It would have been quadruple Wanderer otherwise. So, I feel like, although in theory it looks cool and it can be fun to ban out a deck and think about what you're building your decks to ban around, there are some flaws that I worry about with changing the Conquest format. Sorry, Makuta.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, just so I'll start with my format preference. So with the sideboard is my preferred format, I think. So partly because I'm used to it from Magic the Gathering, but I think sideboarding adds a lot of nuance to gameplay that you don't normally see, and that Conquest kind of loses. So decks can often counter each other pretty hard, right? There's specific cards or specific strategies that are very difficult for other decks to beat. But when you get to play sideboard games, it answers that kind of interesting question of like, but what if the matchup wasn't that bad? What if you could play Emerald Rejuvenator in the main deck of your mid-range deck and be, happier against aggro? Like, normally you couldn't do that. It would be embarrassing. You'd lose horribly because you had these 4/4s that didn't do anything against control or whatever. But against aggro, you can change your deck, you can shift your plan. Some people have like a deck that transforms into a different deck post-board. There's a lot of weird ways that a single deck that might be quite well known, like your net deck that is like 39 cards that Reveroth put together, might be completely different after board in different games. And I think exploring those possibilities is actually really fun and interesting. And it's nice to see what happens when you get the opportunity to mitigate your bad matchups, when you get the opportunity to like trick people, to lead them. And I think the games have more of a narrative as they change post-board. Like sometimes people re-sideboard before game 3. Sometimes it is a bit. The only awkward thing is that you don't know whether you're going to be going first or not. I think that could add, like you did in Magic, I think that could add some interesting angles to it. But in general, I think that has more of a flow and more of an interesting look on the game that you can't normally get on ladder than you get from Conquest. And I also agree with what Hacker and Frost said about deck accessibility. Like, I have tons of dust. On stream, people tease me for how much spirit I have lying around, but I can build the decks, but I don't have time. I have a job. I have lots of other stuff that I do. I don't get to play that often. So for me, being able to only practice one deck is quite valuable as well. Like there's a cost in spirit of having and collection size of having different decks. There's also a cost in just being practiced enough with something to be able to play it. And if I want to train for a Conquest tournament, I have to learn 4 decks instead of 1. So suddenly my day and a half of I might take a day off work or take a Saturday and train, but that's going to be much more efficient if I'm working on 1 deck with a sideboard than if I'm working on 4 different decks that I may chop and change as they go. And finally, the last point is that because most deck lists in this game you get from the ladder, right? You look at the power rankings, you find a deck, it doesn't have a sideboard, so people have to build their own sideboards, and that allows you, even if you're net decking and you're comfortable and confident with the net deck, it gives you, it kind of nudges you to experiment yourself, to express yourself, and to think about, well, what am I likely to face? And in a matchup like this, where you can see what your opponents played last week, you might be able to tune your sideboard to match theirs, to mix it up from week to week. I didn't take that opportunity this week. I'm still playing the same thing I played last week, but that's partly because I just kind of resubmitted it and then realized, oh wait, I can look at their deck lists. What am I doing? So next week I'll definitely be tuning both my main deck and my sideboard to potentially counter what I think I'll be coming up against. And I think that adds a really fun, flexible, interesting angle that you don't get from normal ladder play, and that is valuable for both players and watchers of tournaments.
Well said.
Oh yeah. So I do agree with all the points you've made, and logistically, for all the reasons mentioned, I do think it's probably smarter to have all of it as 1 deck, 10 card sideboard. The reason I brought it up is because I prefer playing Conquest, which is why that's just a preference. But I also think, on the argument for sideboarding, having a sideboard adds a little adds an aspect where someone who knows the deck is much more rewarded for it. We have a lot of people, and we were talking about this, Mercudo, we were talking about this in the Duelyst Central Discord with Aggro Reaver. A lot of people net decked alphas and don't really know how to play it. And so adding that sideboard rewards, especially with Wanderer, where you've got one off, it rewards people who really know why every card is in that deck and what matchups they're good in, as opposed to people who went on power rankings, looked at the top 5 and chose the one that they could afford.
Of course, they couldn't have looked at the power rankings because they weren't up yet. Well, at least for this month. They were done for last month.
Wait.
But the point still stands.
I think that's actually a fair point. I think that's okay because it's a tournament. They generally reward skill. But that is a fair point, that it does push you down a little bit if you're just looking to try and get yourself into the scene. it's another thing you have to learn and understand.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing that it does that. I think rewarding the players who really know the decks really well is a great thing. It increases the skill ceiling.
Definitely. In Magic the Gathering, sideboarding is very emphasized in competitive games. Like 2/3 of the games you'll play are post-board. So knowing how to sideboard and how post-board games are different is a really big deal. And I guess it's the same here.
Yep. It's been a similar experience to what I've gotten. I know back when I was playing in the final Duelyst Melees, my main deck, when I was playing Wander Ragnar and pretty much all of them, my main deck was like not changing, but like each week my sideboard would have like 6 new cards or something. And I'd be like, this is my game plan this week. This is what I'm doing this time. This is what didn't work. This is what did. So I don't know. It's a largely unexplored part of Duelyst because it, isn't set up to have it in. And so it's a neat part of the competitive scene that, like, getting better at the competitive scene will allow you to get better at. But we're out of time for this subject, and we're trying to be timely now. Timely, responsible adults.
Before we move on, I just want to bring up one thing. Why?
Yeah.
Duelist sideboards are 10, but we work in increments of 3. I think it should be 12.
So
Dude, I work in increments of 1. I don't know what you're talking about.
in Magic the Gathering, your sideboard is 15 cards. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the game plays 4 ofs.
Right,
So-
and you have 60 card decks. So it's 15 cards is like 1/4 of your deck size, right? So same thing in Duelist. 10 cards is 1/4 of your deck size.
Okay.
People have brought up the fact that some 20, between, we'll say, 15 and 22 cards in your deck in Magic are lands. But
Sometimes you fab more lands, though.
yeah,
That's true.
no, that's true.
In Duelist, you can replace, so you're more likely to hit your sideboard cards anyway.
Yeah, no.
True.
So, but the reason for 10 card sideboards is actually just because that's what we've been doing. I'm going to be perfectly honest here and say I just took that because it seemed to work as far as size go. Yeah, the numbers don't line up perfectly, but I kind of like that. I like forcing people to think. I can't just say, oh, I'm just going to throw this, and this into my sideboard. It's just that easy. It kind of encourages people to choose 2 ofs, 3 2 ofs and a 3 of and a 1 of or something. I don't know. I personally, when I was going through it, liked that aspect that I was being forced to say, I'm not just shoving these cards out and these cards in. But people have been pretty vocal about wanting to try different size sideboards. It's not going to happen during this event, maybe in a future one.
Just to go off of your point of thought out sideboards, I don't remember who the pilot was, but I was looking through deck lists and someone was running Cypherion, and he had 1 Azure Herald, 2 Healing Mystics main deck, and 2 Azure Heralds, 1 Healing Mystic sideboard. And I was like, wow, a lot of thought went into that. I don't know, I don't know why or what the reasoning was, but there was a lot of thought there.
Either a lot of thought or a little thought, one of the two. But now we are actually going to move on. We're only a few minutes late this time. But we're going to move on to the fun part of this, which is actually going over some deck lists from the Meltdown League Week 1 that we personally picked out because they interest us. So, yeah, Icy, do we have the images able to be brought up on screen for the viewers?
I have all of them on standby that we talked about before, so just tell me which one and I'll pull it up.
Nice. All right, Makuta, do you want to start us off with your list and make sure to say whose it is so Icy can throw it up?
Yeah, so I've got I've picked up 2 decks here. We'll start with the simpler one, which is Aggro River. This is a very popular deck right now, so I figured it'd be worth discussing. So I played against an Aggro River pilot in last week, in week 1, who I think their list is exactly Alpha Century's main deck.
Yep,
I'm
it
not
is.
sure about the sideboard. So this list, for those who haven't seen it before, it's the Songhai version of the Flameblood Warlock face deck. You're playing very aggressively, trying to get in big bursts of damage with cards like Mist Dragon Seal, using Juxtaposition as both tempo and a way to get damage to your opponent's face. A key part of its plan, according to experienced pilots, is juxtapositioning away your opponent's Wanderer when they play it, so you can turn that into a swing turn, where you seize the tempo and get ahead on board. I think so. I've been having some discussion with people about this list recently. It's one of those decks where the people who play it think it beats Wanderer, and the people who play Wanderer, or at least me, think Wanderer beats it. Although I don't think it's quite so binary as that. Like, I think I've not personally struggled against it yet. I think there's got to be a specific way to play it where I think it's very easy to hemorrhage cards, and you end up with like 2 or 3 cards left in your hand with your opponent still on 15, and you just can't win at that point because, like, if I'm ahead on board, I've got a random Dancing Blades in play or something, and an egg, and Raver's got nothing, and like I'm still on 15, I've won. Like the game is over. And so far in my experiences, that's been happening. And I think with people wanting to pick up this deck, don't just net deck it. Make sure you're comfortable managing the flow of cards, knowing when to go in. Like, personally, if people play their 2-drop and then they Mist Dragon Seal a Killing Edge it in and kill my 3-drop or something, that's great. Like, I'll play them more and remove their thing, and now I have the board. So don't just go in trying to make tempo plays, trying to get that sort of ephemeral advantage, because you still have to take them 25-0, and the deck does not have that much reach. Unless you get really lucky with Lantern Fox draws and you generate like 5 Phoenix Fires, it's going to be difficult to actually kill your opponent from far away. Unlike 8 gates, for instance.
Yeah, like I was saying with the sideboarding, allowing people who know the deck better to play it better. Aggro Raver is one of those decks that a series of people who like Songhai just net decked from Alpha, because Alpha made 3 or 4 videos on it, claiming its strengths. And I agree with those strengths. I played it week 1. I was the only person that didn't run Alpha's version of the list, which I'm quite proud of. But it's a very strong deck, but it's a very hard deck to play. It can do wonders, and I think it is favored against Wanderer, but not insanely. Wanderer can definitely win if the Aggro Raver misplays and runs out of gas.
I think... Sorry.
I was just going to sum up my point. I think it's one of the best decks in the format, but also one of the hardest decks in the format to play.
Yeah, and I think most aggro decks are unfairly labeled as easy. I think especially in this game, Songhai decks, aggro really requires you to make so many micro decisions on like what damage is going face, when am I clearing minions, when am I ignoring minions, when am I just focusing on my end game plan, that just having kind of a cursory knowledge of how to play aggro decks isn't going to get you as far as someone who really has a full grasp of what the deck's trying to do. Just looking at this list, I noticed that there's 2 Night Watchers in the board, and two Tusk Boars main decks. So like there, like you guys said, like you need to know what every card in this deck does. Like there are cards that are like counter synergistic between main and sideboard. Like someone who's just picking up this deck for the first time isn't going to be able to understand those nuances.
Yeah, I know that aggro decks and Duelyst have always felt like they require a lot more finesse than, like, red deck wins in Magic. Just cast Lightning Bolt on your face, look at my hand, see 6 more, that's 21. The positioning and kind of card management of Duelyst really does bring a lot to that. But I want to keep this moving so we can see all 8 decks that we've that we've brought to talk about today. So, Icy, what is your first deck?
My first deck that I really want to talk about is Jason's Wanderer Xerix, because it's really good, and people have been talking about it a lot more recently. But for quite a while, it's just been Jason going in Discord saying, Wanderer Xerix, it's the next big thing, and no one ever everyone dismissing it and saying no. And only recently has he really proven that it's strong, and so I really want to talk about it now. Uh, so he was talking in Duelyst Official earlier. He's been teching it to try and run Aggro Wanderer. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that and just dump it off the conversation onto you guys.
I love Aggro Wanderer. I haven't played it with Xerix, but I've been playing a Lilith Aggro Wanderer on ladder, and I've had more success with it than I have with kind of your standard Wanderer Lilith. And I just think, like, if you're the aggressor and you're playing Wanderer, especially in Magmar or Lilith, who can cheat out the buff, I just think you're like just so poised to take advantage of that +1/+1 buff and like just snowball with it so much quicker than the other Wanderer lists.
So I can say that from my side of things, in terms of Aggro Wanderer, that was actually my sideboard decision for the last Duelyst Melee that I played in. Was that basically I had a traditional mid-ranged Ragnora for my main board, or my main deck, and then my sideboard had all these cards like Flameblood Warlock, Thumping Wave, like I think Saber Spine Tiger, like, and it threw just stuff in that would deal damage to face. And it was actually to beat Rava Wanderer, because I realized I can't really outvalue them. Like, Rava Wanderer just kind of goes over the top in that department, because they're able to so easily answer your eggs even post-Wanderer. And so I think that, you know, at least having an aggro plan in the sideboard is a really good place to be as a Wanderer deck. In terms of putting it in the main board, you know, that's totally a meta decision. Like, do you think you're going to want it more game one? Do you think being more proactive is going to be good? Or do you think you're going to be facing decks that are faster than you, and a more traditional mid-range kind of thing would suit you better? So that's completely up to the person and what they think they'll be facing.
I'm personally of the opinion that handle Flameblood Warlock with care. Like, I think if you're considering, do I want Flameblood Warlock or not, the answer is no. Like, if you want Flameblood Warlock, you really want it, and otherwise the card is way too risky, way too punishable. Like, Red Tier Alchemist is popular, Pings are popular, like, the face damage to yourself really matters. I love the idea of playing sideboard aggro Wanderer, though. I think that's clever. But I think Wanderer's fairly capable of being aggressive anyway. Like, the way I play it like a draft deck. You try and snowball a board. That's kind of your main, like, objective, and you have all these minions that remove other minions to do that with, so you try and just get ahead on board and run them over. I think that works. It's like, it's not really aggro. It's not aggro in the sense that it doesn't have Flameblood Warlock in it, but it's similar.
But let me bring up a point to you while you're in the middle of that. What if, and hear me out, what if Flameblood Warlock was a 4/2?
I mean, that's quite nice.
Really,
it still does depend on turn 1 is the only problem.
Yeah.
Blood tiering a Flameblood Warlock is the most satisfying thing in Duelyst. So clean.
Yeah.
What about
Flameblood Warlock? You as Cassiver, Cryptographer.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think the most
Yeah, but actually the satisfying. Before we go on to your deck, Frost, because I always say that we're gonna do this quick, but you know, the most satisfying turn 1 as player 2 against a Flameblood turn 1 is actually Blood Tier above the tile into Azure Herald in the second.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Everything they did, take control of the board and kill their guy. Now that's a start.
You did nothing. Your turn 1.
Turn 1 Gravity Well, Crystal Wisp. Turn 1 from the other side, Crater.
But yeah, no, I look forward. I honestly hope that Jason can post some good results with Wanderer Xerix, because I know that Xerix has been the punching bag of Wanderer aside from
Faye.
Vanar. But Vanar at least got a chance to stand in the sun, you know. Hopper and I played it to top 4 finishes at Trial of Mithron, so you know, it got a shot. So, but we'll see what Icicle Jason can do. But Frost, what's your first deck that you wanted to talk about?
So my first deck is also a Wanderer list. It's Nicklaren's Lilith Wanderer. And I gotta give him respect for playing Lilith Wanderer, because I wanted to do it, but I couldn't in good faith do it. I think Lilith she gets a bad rap in the Wanderer game, because when I read complaints about Wanderer, a lot of the time it's, oh, I got Darkfire Sacrifice, the interaction is so broken. But when we're talking about Wanderer viability, she's almost never in the conversation. It's always Reva, Ragnora first, Reva, Brome, and then Lilith. And I just think Lilith is not getting the respect she deserves in Wanderer. So Nicklaren was not playing an aggro version. He was playing the more standard, high-end version with Revenant, and he actually played 3 artifacts: Mind Lathe, Wraith Crown, and of course Fear Chakram. But I thought the 2 inclusions were interesting. What I was interested in looking at, and I went ahead and looked at the numbers, was how many Abyssian cards there were actually in this list, because I think a lot of the argument that Lilith doesn't handle Wanderer as well as just the Abyssian cards aren't high enough quality. So 22 of his main deck cards were from the Abyssian faction, whereas I looked at Makute, your list, was only running 17 Magmar cards. So Ragnora, I think on average, is actually relying more on the neutral class cards than Lilith is. And looking at Draco Moriota's Reva Wanderer list, he actually only had 15 Songhai cards in his main deck, so he was relying on neutral cards the most. So I think there's some disparity here in how good this Lilith Wanderer list is.
Yeah, I don't know. So I'm just reading through it. I'm not sure how some of these Abyssian cards are like. There's a Gloom Chaser in this deck, for instance, which is not an amazing card. I guess it's there just because it helps with. Are they playing Inkling Surge? They are. Yeah, it helps with Inkling Surge and Furiosa. So the Lilith one has more synergy going on, which is why you probably end up with more Abyssian cards in the deck. And they've got some nice 6-drops and stuff. But I think in terms of whether the Abyssian cards get there or not, I think that the main thing that makes the difference is Abyssian's removal. Like, the thing I always struggle with any sort of slow Abyss deck is that their removal is not very good. Like, they have a lot of different removal spells, and they all feel bad to get hit by from the other side. But when you're actually building a deck, like Ritual Banishing has an important downside, Punish has an important downside, Death Mark has an important downside. Like, there's no real... Whereas Magmar is like Plasma Storm, Homeostatic Rebuke, Eggmorph, Thumping Wave, Lull. Like, all these really, really good removal spells that can bail you out of a ton of situations where you fall behind. Abyssian doesn't have that. They have, like, Breath of the Unborn, which is a fine card, but it only works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't really get you there, and you need cards that can bail you out. So I think that's the main problem with Lilith. The flip side of this is that I used to play Lilith religiously in Highlander tournaments before Mithril Wanderer came out, because it's really good in that meta where, like, again, bear in mind, this is without Ragnora, I think, even existing at that point, but she's really good because you can play loads and loads of 2-card combos. I don't know how many of them are really in this deck, but things like Shadow Dancer were absolutely key in that. Yeah, they're not running Shadow Dancer, which is
I have Shadow
fair
Dancer
enough.
on my list.
But yeah, it's very good, or at least it was in Highlander the format. Like, I don't know if I'd play it now in a Mithril Wanderer list, but that sort of thing where you have these little, like, Soul Grimoire I used to run, which isn't in here either. Like, these very powerful little mini combos that you can set up that I was banking on, that I don't know if they're really good enough in a non-Highlander meta, but the deck still worked on ladder when I played it, so I think possibly exploring that direction might be valuable.
Yeah, and like I was saying, like I'm a big believer in the Wanderer, or in the aggro Wanderer, where I think you can utilize a lot more of those kind of mini synergies. But when I was playing the slower deck, it did seem to rely on Grasp of Agony a little too much for comfort.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can rely on that in your one of your Chakram. But I had to give Nicklaren the shout out.
Yeah, I know that when Nicklaren submitted that deck the first week, they said they really wanted to play it at least 1 week to prove that Wanderer Lilith was also a top tier Wanderer deck before Wanderer got banned out of the tournament, which isn't happening as of right now. As far as I'm considering, it's pretty fine. I haven't seen any like abusive Wanderer stuff going on that can't be handled by people in the tournament. But you know, I know they too wanted to prove that it's like a solid choice at the very least. But yeah, no, it was really nice to see just the inclusion of the other Wanderers in the first week of the tournament at least. And I know that Jason's gonna play Wanderer Xerix for the entirety of it, so we're gonna see plenty more. But
If
we're
ban
really,
our Wanderer?
Good
Maybe.
Guy Hopper was running Fey Wanderer, but then, like I said, they turned into a football and are currently in the process of moving. So they aren't actually.
I've been playing a little Fey Wanderer on ladder, and I've actually been pretty impressed with how it's performed. It's got like a nice blend of like reliable ramp and strong removal spells.
Mm-hmm. No, I think there's probably something there. I do think it's a little less powerful than some of the other ones. But to keep things moving along, and we're coming up to my first deck, which, to the surprise of everyone in chat, is actually a Songhai list. I wanted to look at Poncho Mango's Ebenox list, because I think there are some very interesting card choices in here, and they 3-0'd their first week with this list. So I just wanted to kind of go over that, because I also do really believe that Ebenox is kind of an underplayed archetype right now. I've been saying that ever since Monk beat my face in an Ostracon tournament. And even Monk thinks that Ebenox isn't as good as I say it is. Last I heard. But, you know, it's like this really beefy mid-range list that you just sort of play good minions up a curve, then you get this big tempo turn where you get a free 5/5, and then you just start shooting crap. Like, it's as easy as that. Poncho goes a little deeper than Monk chose to go with the inclusion of Ash Mephit. I kind of like that in this like Trials expansion, Ash Mephit has gotten some like special shoutouts as like a post-trial card in both the Lionar and Songhai Trials, because the way it works in the Songhai Trial, I'll talk about that one right now, is that while you're building up the trial, Ebenox looks at cards played from your action bar to determine what costs have played. However, afterwards, it's just cards that enter the field. And so when you play an Ash Mephit, you get a 5 and 2 more 5s, which means you immediately deal 15 damage. Just randomly, but still, that's like a lot. It kills like giant things or your opponent. Other notes I have about their list: I think it's interesting that they have a Singleton Heartseeker to kind of fill out the 1-drop slot. They've also got Celestial Phantoms, which I don't know if that's like extra Wanderer tech, but that's a really interesting choice to me. And they've got Dagonas, so they've actually got the like 1-8 minions that they're able to. The minions on a scale from 1 to 8, so they only need 7 of those, you know? I thought this was interesting, and they've been doing quite a bit.
One thing that I think is a really cool card that you can put into Ebenox, but not really anything else, is Golden Mantella, the 3-mana 4/2 draw battle pet, because all the battle pets cost 1. So you can run your 3 blood tiers as your 1-mana curve, and then you play Golden Mantella and you get another 1-drop, increasing your consistency of drawing them, so you don't have to rely on getting your blood tier or your Dagona. Also in the list, he runs 1 red Sinja. I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about that.
So I've actually played Hideatsu on a mount. I played it as like, let's do a meme stream, and it worked reasonably well. Funnily enough, I also had the Singleton Heartseeker. I think I had 3 Blood Tears, 1 Heartseeker. This list has a lot of really weird cards in it. I feel like you're looking to high roll people a little bit. I think the Phantom is clever. 2 Ash Methods is probably a bit greedy. Same with 3 Dagonas. The thing that I like the Red Sinja. I think that's kind of clever, but I've never been able to bring myself to play it. I always want to play it in like Wanderer Mirrors, but it's just I just end up playing Pandora instead. But the thing that I'm surprised isn't in here is Calligrapher, because that was my 7-drop and it was amazing. Calligrapher is a really good way of reloading your hand, giving you some reach because you can get burn spells off it, and giving you some tools that you wouldn't normally have access to, whether or not you're playing mono. I think I had some spells in my deck, like OBS and stuff. But regardless, there's no harm in just generating some extra ones that can help you go over the edge. And of course, once you have Hideatsu down, it's 10 damage total out of hand plus a bunch of spells.
Yeah, I think Calligrapher is really strong in the deck for the same reason that Lantern Fox is strong in Wanderer Reva, which is that it gives your deck access to like things it shouldn't have access to. You know, as a Wanderer Reva deck, you should not be able to play more than 1 Phoenix Fire, but this card allows you to do that, just like Calligrapher allows you to play spells in a deck that really doesn't want to play spells. One thing that I think is interesting about the archetype is, like you were saying, Icy, about like Mantella finds a home here where he does not have a home anywhere else. This deck also gives homes to cards like Astral Crusader and Chakram, not Führer, the 5-drop that becomes a 3-drop, because you play them for their reduced cost, but they count as your as the tick for the higher cost. So they can be a kind of like a cute way of sneaking out an early Hidetsu, which I think is interesting.
Another thing this deck could probably use is Geomancer. Like, Geomancer is backup for when you can't get Hideatsu to go off. It's a bunch of value and removal. It's face burst. And, you know, it fills out a 5-slot. Like, cutting Ash Methods for Geomancers might be an interesting shout. And possibly even opens the door to playing Cryptographers or Bloodbound Mantles, because in the early game you get a double teleport, and later on you get a double Phoenix Fire. Just like spell generators in general seem like an interesting place to go with a list like this.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna cut us there, take the last note, and say that if I was actually gonna say that there's a deck that counters Wanderer, this is the style of deck that I think counters Wanderer. Big, fat, girthy minions with a top end that can like actually fight it. Like, Wanderer's trial doesn't beat Evanox's trial. I mean, that's kind of what I have to say on that. And like, these minions have the stat lines to deal with buffed minions. This is what I think beats Wanderer, if people want to know. Like, actually, this and Titan Lionar, I think, beat Wanderer both quite efficiently if you play and build them correctly. But that's my final thing I'm saying on that. Makuta, we're going to go to your second list that you chose.
All right, so this is a spicy one. This is a Ice Age by Snowshot. So this is a really interesting list that I think I mentioned earlier that I thought I found a list that does actually have a good Wanderer matchup, like just a genuinely good matchup, and this is it. So this list is a ramp Vanar variant that's based around Ice Age Winter's Wake as the main win condition, but it also contains a bunch of cards that line up very well against Magmar or Wanderer or both. Things like Snow Chaser, Malicious Wisp, Luminous Charge. These cards that are just super annoying to get through and allow you to buy time. The deck doesn't play Mana Death Grip, so it just plays 6 ramp effects, which is still, enough. You'll get 1 or 2 most games. Ice Age is fine by itself. You've got Razorback to turn it into some attacks, but obviously if you draw the Winter's Wake, it's game over. The one thing the deck doesn't have is card draw, but what I found actually happened in my matches with Snowshot is that they would sort of get down to 3 cards quite quickly because they're playing ramp or removal spells or Gravity Well, and then just stay on the 3 cards for a while, like top decking, like play a Luminous Charge pass, play a Cloud Caller pass, and then while I deal with these cards, while having to respect phase BBS, because obviously that provides a clock by itself, they can find a little bit of time to find something that actually kills me. And more importantly, Wanderer has only very specific answers to Luminous Charge and Ice Age, in particular. And once you run out of those answers, you're completely vulnerable to the next one that comes up. The deck has just enough tricks to like keep the Rippers off, phase back, and continue to remove things. Like Hearth Sister Thunderhorn puts in a lot of work, basically. Is very hard to play around. And so I don't know what their sideboard was, if they had one, but this list felt really strong to play against. And I think, so I also lost to it on ladder. There's one of my like 2 or 3 ladder losses with Wanderer was to someone playing this with Kara, and it just completely blindsided me. So I think without that information disadvantage, like I replaced an EMP in game 1 and then felt like an idiot 3 or 4 turns later. So obviously that game would have gone very differently if I'd known what they were doing. But even when I did, and I'd had the chance to sideboard, it was still a tough matchup, and I did end up losing that match. I think this list is very expensive. Like there's a ton of legendaries in it, so use your spirit at your peril. But it looks really fun to play, and there's probably some tinkering you can do. Like there's some cards in here that you could cut for card draw. Some ways you could smooth out the curve. Like there's some interesting stuff going on, and I think it's viable with at least Faye and Kara, and possibly also Elena, if Elena is ever going to be viable. So yeah, props to Snowshot for a sweet deck and a good match.
Yeah, I think it is interesting how a lot of the Vanguard decks save like Fae aggro. A lot of the Vanguard decks, the generals are like very interchangeable, more so than some of the other factions. Like this could so easily be a Kara deck. You really wouldn't need to change anything. And then it could be an Ilena deck with the caveat of you add Ice Shatter Gauntlet, because after that if you're playing Ilena. But that is kind of an interesting aspect of the Vanguard faction.
Caveat, I don't think Ilena is viable in general right now, but if anyone wants to experiment and prove me wrong, please do.
So that was actually what I was going to bring up, which is basically this deck is interesting because it focuses less on just the Ice Age combo, like Ice Age Winter's Wake. But I kind of feel like if you're going to call it a Wanderer counter, I like Ilena best, because the Ilena decks that focus on the linear game plan of get out Ice Age, get out Winter's Wake, are pretty heavily, that I've like seen or that I built recently, are pretty heavily focused on just ramping up to be able to cast your spells, cast them, get the. It's a combo deck. It's more of a strict combo deck that's just stay alive until I kill you with this one-shot thing that you will almost certainly not live through. Give the Wanderer deck as little time as possible to answer. One of the losses I had on ladder as Wanderer against an Ice Age deck was just because they ramped multiple times and like Malicious Whispered me or something and pulled so far ahead on mana, even though I had the EMP in hand. It just didn't, because I couldn't cast the EMP because I was on like 6 and they were on 9. Like,
wow. There's
not always that much you can do against that, and so I think if you're gonna try and tout it as that, I think I like the versions that use Ilena as just sort of a tool to stay alive a bit more, even if they are a bit less consistent, because if you don't draw the combo pieces, then you're lost. So
that's fair. I'll have to experiment with that.
Well, initially I want to say Snowshot did go 3-0 with this deck week 1. Week 2 he went 0-3, but I don't know if I have no idea whether he changed the deck or not. So it's either 3-0 or 3-3, which is still pretty good. But
it's super soft to aggro, I think.
Yeah, talking about the deck in the archetype in general, as opposed to the deck, some really cool techs against Wanderer is Aspect of Ego, and because he's got Razorback in there as well, Jack's True Sight. Like, the Jack's Razorback combo is good when you can pull it off, and you can be a lot greedier in a meta with Wanderer. But for 7 mana, True Sight Ego on the 6 mana 1/1, you get a 6-drop and 4 mini Jaxies. That's a pretty effective turn. Or for 5 mana, if you Aspect of Ego the egg that Ragnora Wanderer will spawn, it becomes a battle pet because it becomes
Only
Ray.
Ray.
And then you can play that with Thunderhorn for 5 mana.
That's great.
So I think those combos were worth mentioning.
Ego your Malicious Wisp, they can't get their mana back.
Yeah, that as well.
Ego
Listen,
your
no,
Embla into Chimera. I did that on ladder the other day. Egoed Embla into Chimera and beat someone to death with a Chimera because I couldn't draw Winter's Wake. Yeah, it can become like Chimera, Meltdown, something like it can turn back into Embla. I think whatever it started. I forget what other like 8 mana. Oh yeah, Dagona is the other one.
Yeah, Matron Elvati.
That's 7, I thought, or is it 8?
No, it's 8.
I don't know. I haven't played that card.
Can it turn into Excelsius like the with Strategos?
Oh, it can turn into any factions as well with Ego? Oh yeah,
it can.
It can.
Oh, okay. So there's more, but 8 mana big dudes are pretty good too. Usually
the other day,
vanilla.
I have a ramp Vanilla list with a funnel of Aspect of Ego in it. The other day I played Malicious Wisp and Aspect of Ego into Wasteland Wraith. And then but it did nothing, and then I had time to play Pandora. It was amazing.
That seems okay. Aspect of Ego is a fun card. I like that more than I thought I would. But alright, we should continue moving on because we're already overtime for overtime. We're just about. So, Icy, your second list.
Let me grab it real quick. This list I versed this week, and hang on, trying to focus on 2 things there. So this is Galaru's Control Ziran, and I think it is one of the best decks in the format. I've been pushing him. I got him to do a write-up on it, and I've been running it a lot on ladder. The only questionable choice is Orbo, but other than that, the deck feels really well optimized to verse almost anything that's flying around.
So, Icy, can I ask you to go ahead and explain the Orbo interaction that you told me earlier, just in case the viewers at home don't know what's going on?
Oh yeah, sure. So Orbo, when I got Galaru to do the write-up on it, the thing he mentioned is if you don't have Orbo and you're going to tech it out, don't replace it with another 3-drop. Replace it with something like EMB or Paragon, because the point of Orbo is sometimes late game in the control mirror or in a grindy game against Wanderer, you get that point where you've got a Sterope down and you've got about 4 or 5 True Strikes in hand, and you play Orbo with that and turn a bunch of True Strikes that you're generating anyway into late game threats and powerful legendaries. So that's the whole purpose of the card being there. It's definitely suboptimal, but it does work.
I don't know.
Purpose in life.
I don't know if it's definitely suboptimal. I mean, it's a cute combo. It is not one that I would say is, strictly maybe the best thing you can do, but I haven't played it and I see the thought behind it. It is a pick based on the metagame. If it's actually late game and grindy, it really can transform a lot of cards in your hand into just big dumb threats. There are a lot of big dumb legendary threats in Lionar.
It can be anything, like.
It can be any faction or neutral, though.
Oh, okay.
It can't be other factions. But, on average, turning a True Strike into, I don't know, it probably averages out to a 5-drop, will usually do you some amount of value against a deck that's trying to run you out of cards. There's the question of how many of those there are, but, this is definitely the kind of deck that wants to run other people out of cards. It's not playing a lot of burn. It's playing a lot of removal. It's playing healing and big things that allow them to like survive and remove guys, you know. So I think in here it might actually have finally found a home, and I'm just so happy that like somebody found a use for Orbo. I'm not about to like shoot them down for it, and they're the only 6-0 in the league right now.
That is true.
It's also running Celso, which is another card that gets a lot of slack.
Celso's really good in this
Sunforge
list.
Lancer.
Yeah.
There's no Sunforge Lancer.
I
That really
can.
surprises me.
He did say why. I can pull it up whilst you guys.
So while you're pulling that up, I'm going to make an assumption as to why, which is that I think that this deck doesn't want to be throwing its face into things. And I think that you don't need Sunforge Lancer if you're not throwing your face into things. Also, Sunforge Lancer puts you at a really big disadvantage to Ka. And, like, you know, if you don't need it, you don't need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
So here I have the excerpt from the article.
Peak.
So Galaru says, I did run it in this deck for a long time, as I also thought a Ziran deck without Lancer is blasphemy. Still, I'm not sure if the Lanceless version is the optimal way, but it is doing good, so I'm sticking with it. Here's my reasoning. You already have strong 3-drops that can do your dirty work and receive healing turn out to be better. Bonus attack on the general is not always useful because people tend to develop their threats out of your range, and also Ka. Silverguard and Cell Soul do not force me to play my heal procs when I drop them, and I have to save heals for my other heal synergy cards that I think are more consistent, so Sterope and Sunriser. And then
Fair enough.
his other points were he excluded Tempest because it doesn't feel necessary with Sterope, with the True Strikes filling that similar role. I think the reason I love this deck is I run Paragon instead of Orbo to deal with Wanderer. There are no matchups where I'm running this deck and I feel like I can't win. There are some matchups where I find that I'm just like, oh dear God, this is gonna be, if I win this, that's surprising. Like Aggro Reaver versus Magmar is one of those. This deck just aims never to hopelessly lose, to always have a fighting chance, and that's why I like it a lot.
Nice.
Yeah, I think earlier when we were talking about Fault Wanderer being a little too high in the rankings, I think that this deck deserves to probably be a little bit higher.
I think that's actually probably true. Ziran has been doing very well both on ladder and in the Meltdown League. And it was not rated super low, but it was not rated super high either.
It was 6.
But I think that... Really?
Yeah.
I think it could be higher than 6, though.
Yeah,
I think it could be top 5.
I think I agree with you, Icy. It just like never feels like it has a bad matchup. And like I haven't really played against it a lot. Or sorry, I haven't played with it a lot, but I have played against it a lot. And like whatever I'm running into a Ziran player is like, ah, man, they have the healing, they have the burst, they have the control. Like the deck kind of does it all.
I swear to God, I am the only player who doesn't feel that way. I have had an exceptional record. Okay, you also feel. Oh, wait, you're the Magma Plasma Storm guy.
Yeah.
So,
all that stuff dies to all my stuff. It's fine.
You know, I play a lot of like Titan. I play a lot of Strategos, not aggro Strategos, just like overwhelming control Strategos. I play Bond. I play a lot of decks that kill people in like 1 to 2 turns because I am winning on board. And Ziran tends to like those less because it means I ignore them largely. They get very little healing synergy off. But I do appreciate that the deck itself is quite strong, and a lot of the kind of conventional methods through which Duelyst is played are quite weak to Ziran's kit right now. So
Yeah, when I played this deck, I did find the weakest matchups were definitely Strategos, Brome, and Bond Argian. If someone drops a Ironcliff, the deck really has to try and deal with it. Unless you want a singular Aperions, which again isn't entirely, it's not the best use of a turn, but you really gotta trade onto it on board and hope you have true strikes, because otherwise that thing's next turn, emo it back up to full health, and then bond and you're dead.
Mhm. But like I said, nobody plays Bond. Everybody thinks it sucks. So, but they're all wrong. But it only sucks against multiple Blood of Airs and Sandsoul readers, which are pretty, like, rarer than they have been in the recent times. So, if you ever want to play Divine Bond, now is not a bad time.
There you go.
All right, Frost, do you want to do your second deck quick?
Yeah, it won't be too long. So my second list is Pierced's Cassivia aggro deck, which, I am actually not super hot on this deck. I think that the deck we just talked about, Tempo Zuran, kind of does everything that this deck does a little bit better. It's got better AoE, it's got better healing, it's got better burst, save maybe Dark Seed in some matchups. But what is super interesting about this deck is if you glance over at that sideboard, there is 2 Blood Tara in that sideboard and 2 Corporal Cadence, which we talked about this a little bit earlier, of decks like we were talking about Wanderer. A Wanderer deck could sideboard into an aggro deck. Well, what if an aggro deck could sideboard into a combo deck that Corporal cadenced you for 12 after playing some Flameblood Warlocks? This deck I don't know how he thought of that, but it's got something else going on the sideboard, and I just thought it was super sweet.
That's made by doing eyes.
And he went 2-1 with it, so not a bad record.
Yeah. Hopefully I didn't blow his cover and people are gonna be playing around Blood Tora now, but yeah, I just thought that this list, the eyebrows went up when I saw this one.
I can say that Pierced went 3-0 this week with an even spicier list.
Oh boy.
But I like how you didn't even talk about the fact that there are Decimus in the sideboard as well. It's not even just the Cadence combo in there. There's Decimus in something other than Starhorn.
True.
Yeah, I was actually gonna talk about Decimus. I think that's a really good inclusion because against Wanderer, because it has the same amount of removal, but a little bit more, it has more inconsistent removal. You can afford to be a little bit greedier and play something like just a Decimus and force them to deal with it. And if they can't, they take 2 every turn. And so things like that, things like Siobhan had a list a while ago that ran Eclipse, things that you wouldn't normally see because they're too greedy or too slow. You can afford to run them against Wanderer.
Yeah. Betrayal is also a little wild too. I mean, that's not really a card you can play main deck, save for Wanderer, where it's it's just one of, maybe I'll get there sometimes. But I think one of the strengths of Abyssian is it's got so many weird, wacky cards that fill these niche roles that in a meta with sideboards, it's really poised to take advantage of some of those.
Especially when people just forget they exist and play into them.
Yeah.
Very easy to do.
Yeah. So really a neat take on an old archetype with the very interesting sideboard and the Venom Toth main board. We're even looking at lots of wonky ways to deal damage here, Pierced. But it seemed to work out well enough. But like I said, we're already over time, so I want to get to the last list. And for my second list and our last list of tonight, I chose Lightning Feet's kind of Dawn's Eye Tempo Brome. And I know that Lightning Feet made a post on, I think it was Reddit or forums or something, but they were originally playing kind of Dawn's Eye Argian, but for this tournament they switched it up to Brome. and we watched a match that they played, and they actually went 0-3 in matches, but went 3-6 in games. So they never got blown out, but they lost all their matches. But I think the deck has potential that wasn't really shown by those losses. I think Brome is a really cool inclusion because a lot of times what people will do is when you're playing this kind of deck is, they'll sort of run away from your general and body block you, and then the artifacts that you have, you remove a minion, they put 2 more up, and they get away. But Brome's BBS actually allows you to lock them, and they're forced to kill it and then run away. And so if you're able to remove their minions with your pretty powerful removal suite, there's even a decimate in here. But then you can just BBS, and then they can't run away, and then you smack them upside the head for 8 if you have a 1 Donzai and 1 Arclight Regalia equipped. And so I thought that was a really neat choice. I also love the inclusion of Sunbreaker. I think Tempest is really, really powerful right now. And the Titan list that I'm playing right now relies heavily on Sunbreaker, and I wrote basically a whole paragraph about that in the power rankings about why I think Sunbreaker is a really, really good tech card at this moment. So I was really happy to see them playing that as well.
I'm slightly surprised that there's no artifact hunter in this deck. Seems like you could play to the board while also finding your artifacts for a little extra consistency. Maybe that's too slow though.
How much mana is Artifact Hunter?
Artifact Hunter's a 3-drop. It's pretty slow.
No, it's a
4-drop.
4-drop.
It's 4 mana 3/4.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
a 4-drop.
it got recently buffed. As a 3/3, it would be embarrassing. As a 3/4, it may be worth a look. But yeah, it is pretty slow, but it at least comes into Dawn's Eye and stuff. So
Yeah.
there's some potential there.
I think
It was into Dawn's Eye, but the value
I think it's too slow for a
really
tempo
fails
list.
to Trinity Oath.
Oh yeah, obviously.
Trinity Oath just is Artifact Hunter. You find an artifact in the top 3 cards of your deck.
I'm not saying you cut Trinity Oath for Artifact Hunter. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, Arclight Regalia is just such a strong card that, kind of like Fury Chakram is the deck that can best abuse Fury Chakram is going to be a strong contender. And I don't know if this is the best deck to abuse Arclight Regalia. There might be better decks out there, but I feel that just kind of giving it a first look, a lot of the power of this deck rests in that Arclight Regalia.
And honestly, the Dawn's Eye with its buff, whereas
Right,
the
the
Artifact
synergy
Hunter
between
buff
the two.
might not be super important, the Dawn's Eye buff, I think, actually has a lot of potential. 5 mana Dawn's Eye is a walloping of a card. You have to break their artifacts in 1 turn, which if they have an Arclight is really annoying to do, and then it's just 4 damage for 5 mana, and then they have to throw multiple things into it. It refreshes at the end of your turn. So
The other card
Yeah,
I would
it's
be,
great.
the other card I would be interested to see if it had a place in this list is what's it called? Lost Artificer, the 2-drop that makes your
Lost
artifacts
Artificer,
cost 1 less.
Mhm.
I've had some decent success with that in Sag lists. 4LW posted a list the other day that was based around Spine Cleaver that it's really good in that list. So maybe it has a home here as well.
I saw a lot of people running Lost Artificer in this type of deck. I think what Lightning Feet is trying to go for is more play for board than ramp out the artifacts as fast as possible. And in that regard, you're better off with Primus Fist, Azurite Lion, and I forget, Windblade Adept as your 9 2-drops than you would going for artifact synergy. I do think Archon Spellbinder in the sideboard is really cool and interesting. And Red Sinja for Wanderer is also an awesome tech.
It's our second Red Syndra we've seen today. Duelyst.
I mean, it deals 7, and there is a minion out there right now that has 7 tech, 7 health, that comes down a turn before this, so...
Well, unless you're flashing it out, then it comes down a significantly a couple turns before Red Sinja. But
Or if you're going
Going first.
second, or
right,
if
yeah.
you're going first and they're going second, then it
Yeah.
also comes down a full cycle before. But still, So I wanted to talk a little bit about Lost Artificer in this list, because I think it's like an interesting idea. I don't know if it's the perfect thing here. I don't know how much reducing the artifacts really does for you, but it is a tempo list, so maybe just getting those artifacts on is like a good thing. Maybe you can swap out like Windblade Adept. Like, is one power loss good enough? Like, is the tempo gained enough to warrant the one power loss? Like, you can like attack with a Lost Artificer and equip your Arclight Regalia if you need to deal 6 damage to something instead of just playing it. I don't know.
I'll be honest, like basically none of the minions other than Sunbreaker and Bloodtear look like they fit especially well to me. I guess Silver God Knight's decent as well. But I would, if I was gonna pick up this list, which I'm sort of tempted to if I have enough Dawn's Eyes, I might try just swapping out a lot of the cheap creatures and seeing how that helps smooth out the playstyle of the deck and give it some additional tools. Like Arclight Sentinel could be a good inclusion, Healing Mystic, all sorts of things. Yeah, I think there's some room in the creature base. There might be interesting choices there.
I want to comment on the just before we wrap up. I want to comment on the Decimus, the Decimate real quick. Lightning Feet was saying he put one Decimate in because you play it, and then the whole time your opponent is scared of a Decimate and they're playing around it. You don't actually have it.
That is a strategy. I don't know how well that works, but I mean, in a best of 3, it works better because you only need to draw it once, and then you can even sideboard it out, and they'll play around it the entire time.
Get them with the mind games.
I love mind games and Duelyst.
On that closing note, I think we're going to be wrapping things up right here. I'd like to, give a thank you to everybody here. Icy Fire 95, Frost Arrow, Son of Makuta, me. Thanks, me. I did so much. No, but it's been great having you guys here, and thank you everybody for watching. We'll throw this VOD up. I get a chance to, along with the cast from week 1, which I still have to get you, Icy.
Yeah.
But no, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm glad you guys are enjoying the tournament so far. And to those of you who are watching, if you want to join the tournament, you take losses for the weeks you haven't been there, but we've decided just to kind of keep registration open. So if you want to become a part of this, feel free to. But yeah, thanks everybody, and we will see you probably in 2 weeks' time if we're back.